Let me ask you something most people are too afraid to ask themselves. Who hurt you without ever raising their voice? Not the obvious enemy, not the one who shouted or slammed doors or made threats in the open. No, I mean the quiet ones, the charming ones, the ones who wrapped their wounds in poetry and handed them to you like gifts. The ones who smiled as they crossed your boundaries, who played the victim while draining your strength. We've been taught to fear monsters, but monsters don't scare me. Not as much as the person who has no idea they're wearing a mask, the one who believes their own lies so deeply. They call their projections love. Carl Jung once said, "The most dangerous things are not evil. They are unconscious." Because the unconscious doesn't ask permission. It doesn't knock. It enters quietly, hides in kindness, and convinces you that your confusion is your own fault. These are not rare people. They are everywhere. Successful, admired, often seen as generous or even spiritual. But inside, they're split, haunted by shadows they've never met, carrying traumas they've never named, and building relationships not out of truth but out of need, out of control. And if you're the kind who feels deeply, who forgives easily, who tries to see the best in people, you're exactly the kind of soul they find. Not out of malice, but because your empathy makes a perfect mirror. If you've ever felt emotionally drained by someone who never admitted their part, if you've walked away from a relationship more confused than heartbroken, if you've questioned your own instincts just to keep the peace, then you've touched this pattern, and maybe, just maybe, some part of you knows you weren't weak. You were the light they couldn't stand to face. So take a breath. We're not here to hate them. We're here to understand what lives beneath their smile. Because the most dangerous people don't hate you. They unconsciously feed on you. And that is far harder to see. You don't meet them in the shadows. You meet them in the sunlight. They seem warm, even wounded, like someone you're meant to help. And that's how it begins. Not with control, not with cruelty, but with sympathy. Because the unconscious manipulator doesn't enter your life wearing armor. They come barefoot, bleeding from old wounds they never took the time to understand. And when they find your open heart, they make it a home. At first, it feels like closeness. They tell you their story, their pain, their disappointments, and you feel chosen, trusted, needed. But soon, something shifts. Their pain becomes the center of everything. Every disagreement turns into a monologue about how they've been hurt. Every boundary you try to set makes you feel like a villain. It's subtle, but exhausting. You start to lose your voice in the name of keeping peace. What makes them dangerous isn't their malice. It's their blindness. They don't know they're manipulating. In their mind, they're just trying to survive. They've lived so long inside the story of their own victimhood that they can't see when they're creating victims of their own. They cast themselves as the misunderstood hero, and anyone who challenges that role is labeled selfish, cold, or abusive. This is projection in its most seductive form. Instead of owning their shame, they hand it to you. Instead of feeling their own helplessness, they create situations where you feel helpless. And the worst part, they often genuinely believe you're the one hurting them. That's why logic fails. That's why explaining never works. You're not in a conversation. You're in their unconscious narrative. Jung warned, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. But when someone else's unconscious is directing your life, that's psychological theft. You begin to question your reality, doubt your intentions, walk on eggshells, and slowly your inner world becomes a mirror of their chaos. If this sounds familiar, you're not weak. You were just emotionally recruited. They didn't need to control you with dominance. They did it through helplessness. And in your compassion, you became the container for their unprocessed past. But now, you see it. And that clarity is the beginning of freedom, because you can't change them, not until they face their own reflection. But you can stop holding the mirror. You can walk away from the illusion, and in doing so, reclaim your energy, your peace, and most importantly, your truth. He enters the room like someone who knows who he is, confident, polished, composed. She smiles with perfect grace, says the right things, never stumbles, never breaks character. And yet something in you feels off. Not wrong, just empty, like you're talking to a performance instead of a person. That's because you are. The persona is not the ego, it's the mask the ego wears to be accepted. Jung described it as the compromise between the individual and society, the version of us that adapts to the roles we think we must play. But when the mask becomes fused to the face, when someone forgets who they are without it, they don't just lose their authenticity, they lose access to their soul. The mask bearer is often admired, charming, capable, respected. They may be successful in their career, admired in social circles, or even seen as a leader. But beneath the surface, there is silence. They don't cry, not really. They don't admit fear, not deeply. Every emotion is filtered through the persona. I'm fine. It's nothing. I've got it under control. And that's where the danger lies. Not in what they show, but in what they hide. Because when you build intimacy with someone who has no access to their real self, you start to feel like you're bonding with a hologram. There's no mess, no truth, no chaos, but also no real connection. You begin to feel unseen, even though they look at you. You feel unheard, even when they respond. You may even feel unlovable, because the version of you they engage with is filtered through the same mask they wear for themselves. The mask bearer often doesn't intend harm. They were taught by parents, culture, trauma, that their true self was too much, too weak, too strange to be loved. So they built a version that would be safe, but safety kills intimacy. And behind their smile is often a graveyard of buried feelings. The longer you stay close to them, the more your own authenticity starts to dim. You begin to question your messiness, your feelings, your rawness. You might even try to perform better, to earn their approval, not realizing that you're trying to please a mask, not a man. And here's the truth no one wants to say. You can't love someone into taking off the mask. That decision is born only in silence, when the pain of pretending finally outweighs the fear of being seen. Until then, the persona remains, and so does the emptiness. So ask yourself, do you want a connection that looks perfect, or one that's real? Because only one of those can save your soul. Some people wear masks, others bury bodies. The repressed shadow holder isn't loud. They don't manipulate with charm or control you with sweetness. No, they suppress, they swallow, they hold back everything they believe is wrong with them. Anger, jealousy, lust, envy, rage, vulnerability. They lock it deep inside like a vault sealed in shame. On the outside, they seem composed, maybe even admirable in their restraint. They speak carefully, behave appropriately, and rarely show intense emotion. But underneath that controlled surface is a storm, Years of repressed feelings, denied desires, and unintegrated pain. And Jung warned us, what we repress doesn't disappear. It waits. They've been trained, usually since childhood, to believe that certain parts of them are unacceptable. Maybe they were told to be good, stay calm, never get angry, never be selfish. So they obeyed. They built a psychological cage to survive in someone else's house. But now, as adults, they don't even realize they're living in that cage, still terrified of their own fire. What makes them dangerous is not their evil, it's their buildup. Because when you repress your shadow long enough, it doesn't fade, it ferments. And sooner or later, it erupts. Sometimes it leaks out in sarcasm, passive aggression, or icy silence. Other times it explodes, violently, unexpectedly, with disproportionate intensity, and those closest to them often pay the price. You may have witnessed it. One moment, they're fine. The next, they're someone else. A flash of fury, a cold withdrawal, a sudden cruelty. And afterward, shame, confusion, denial. I didn't mean it. It wasn't that bad. I was just tired. And yet the damage lingers, because what's been unleashed cannot be undone. If you've loved someone like this, you've probably felt like walking on a minefield. You never know when you'll trigger something hidden. And worse, when you try to get close, they retreat. Not because they don't care, but because your closeness threatens to expose the parts they've tried so hard to bury. The tragic irony is this: their deepest fear is being seen, but what they truly need is to be seen fully, shadow and all. Yet they can't offer you that, not until they face their inner chaos themselves. So if you're in a relationship with a repressed shadow holder, know this: it's not your job to carry their silence. You can love someone and still refuse to be collateral damage for their suppression. You can hold compassion and still protect your peace. Because until they learn to meet their own darkness with honesty, that darkness will always spill into the light you try to build with them. And eventually, the vault breaks. They speak of values, principles, integrity. At first, it sounds noble, even inspiring. They hold themselves to high standards. They do the right thing. They live as they claim with honor. But soon you start to notice something else. The rules aren't just for them. They're for you. And not just suggested, demanded. Not spoken gently, enforced with shame. This is the moral controller. The one who doesn't need to yell or manipulate, because they weaponize virtue. They frame control as care and dominance as decency. They don't ask you to obey. They make you feel immoral if you don't. To first, their presence is grounding. Their clarity gives structure. But gradually, your instincts begin to rot. You doubt yourself constantly, not because they insult you, but because they imply in 1,000 quiet ways that your way of feeling, choosing, thinking is wrong. You become cautious, hyper-aware. You start adjusting your behavior, not from love or respect, but from fear of their disapproval. The danger isn't their morality, it's their projection. Jung taught, when we disown our own impulses, our rage, our sexuality, our selfishness, we unconsciously see them in others. The more pure someone tries to be, the more violently they judge what they've repressed. The moral controller has not transcended darkness. They've only buried it, and now they chase it outside themselves. In you, they might never say you're bad, but you'll feel it in their sighs, their silences, their subtle corrections. They might mask it in concern. I'm just worried about you. or in righteousness. I'm only being honest. But the effect is the same: psychological control dressed as moral superiority. If you're an introspective, self-critical person, this dynamic is lethal. You'll internalize their judgments as truth. You'll mistake their rigidity for wisdom. You'll contort yourself into the better person until you no longer recognize who you are. And here's the cruel paradox. They rarely see themselves as controlling. They believe they're helping, that their pain, and yes, there is pain underneath, gives them license to instruct others. But the truth is, they've never made peace with their own shadow. And so, they obsessively regulate yours. If you've been in their orbit, understand, this isn't about rejecting morality. It's about rejecting the use of morality as control. True integrity empowers, it liberates, it sees the other. But the moral controller doesn't see you. They see a reflection of everything they've exiled in themselves, and they punish it. You don't have to play that role. You are not impure for being human. You are not broken for having contradiction. And the moment you stop seeking their moral approval is the moment you start reclaiming your own authority. They don't seem dangerous at first. They seem wounded, fragile even. They might cry easily, withdraw suddenly, or become defensive over things that seem minor. But what you're witnessing isn't sensitivity. It's instability born from something deeper. You're not talking to a person. You're talking to a complex. Jung described complexes as autonomous fragments of the psyche, emotional programs rooted in past trauma that override our conscious will. And when someone is ruled by their complexes, they stop responding to the present. Everything becomes a reenactment. Every moment is filtered through an old wound. The complex-driven person might appear anxious, erratic, or deeply reactive. One moment they adore you. The next, they accuse you of betrayal. You say something small, and they hear a deep rejection. You forget to reply to a message, and they spiral into panic or cold withdrawal. Their responses feel disproportionate, confusing, even manipulative. But the truth is, they're not performing. They're possessed. They don't want to sabotage the relationship. They want to feel safe. But their nervous system was wired in chaos, so they mistake neutrality for threat, affection for danger, intimacy for abandonment. And anyone close to them becomes part of that chaos, even if your intentions are pure. It's exhausting to love someone who hasn't met their own past. You become a character in their unconscious drama. Their ex becomes a ghost in your conversations. Their parents' neglect becomes your fault. Their shame becomes your burden. And no matter how patient or loving you are, it's never enough because you're not the real enemy. Their memory is. They will apologize. They will say, "I know I overreacted," and you'll want to believe it's getting better. But unless they start doing the internal work, therapy, shadow integration, true emotional responsibility, it's only a matter of time before the next trigger resets everything. You might find yourself constantly calming them, fixing misunderstandings, explaining yourself over and over just to avoid conflict. And slowly, without realizing, your world becomes centered around their emotional temperature. You stop expressing your needs. You start walking on eggshells. And worst of all, you lose your sense of what's real. Because when everything is a projection, nothing feels solid. If this resonates, understand, compassion does not mean self-sacrifice. You can understand their pain without becoming the casualty of it. You can love someone and still say, "This is not mine to carry." The complex-driven aren't evil. They are hurting. But pain that isn't examined becomes a weapon, and you are not here to be the shield. Let them face their echoes. You have a life to live, one rooted in clarity, not emotional whiplash. You don't notice it at first. The fatigue creeps in slowly. Conversations leave you drained. Your thoughts become foggy. Your energy, once sharp and clear, starts to fade. And yet, there was no fight, no abuse, nothing bad enough to name. Just a presence that consumes you. This is the psychic vampire, not in a mythical sense, but a psychological one. They don't bite your neck. They siphon your attention, your vitality, your emotional presence. And they do it through subtle symbiotic ties, excessive neediness, constant crisis, emotional dependence disguised as intimacy. They often appear lost, vulnerable, broken in a way that awakens your caretaker instinct. And if you're an empath, attuned to pain, quick to help, you're their ideal source. Not because they want to harm you, but because you feel like home to their chaos. Your light gives them shape, your strength gives them gravity, and your love gives them a temporary illusion of wholeness. But it's never enough, because they aren't seeking connection, they're seeking containment. They want to be rescued, not reflected, held, not challenged, fed, not empowered. And so every interaction becomes a feeding. You comfort them, support them, absorb their storms, and with every act of care, you become a little less alive inside. Their emptiness is bottomless, and yet they often feel like the victim. No one ever stays. People always give up on me. But what they don't see is that they are not being abandoned. They are exhausting the people who love them. They are pulling energy in, but never circulating it back. Love becomes currency, attention becomes debt, and you become a shadow of yourself just to keep them from falling apart. The danger isn't just in the drain, it's in the illusion of closeness. You feel like you're building intimacy, sharing, bonding, going deep. But what's really happening is a one-sided transaction. Your presence becomes their life raft. But who holds you? Eventually, you start to shrink. You laugh less. You create less. You rest poorly. You feel guilt when you take space and fear when you set boundaries. Because in their world, your autonomy equals rejection. Your silence equals betrayal. If this feels familiar, it's time to reclaim your psychic center. You are not a battery. You are not a therapist. You are not the answer to someone else's abandonment wound. Love without boundaries is not love. It's surrender. You can be compassionate without being consumed. You can walk away and still wish them healing. Because real connection requires mutual exchange. And your energy is sacred. Don't let someone else's void become the gravity that pulls you out of your own life. You were not born to be drained. You were born to rise. You've seen their faces now, not to judge them, but to recognize the weight they place on your soul. Because awareness is protection, and clarity is liberation. Not all danger comes with malice. Sometimes it arrives disguised as connection. But your energy is not infinite. Your light is not a gift to be harvested. So take this truth with you. You don't owe anyone your collapse in order to prove your compassion. You don't have to lose yourself to hold space for someone else's unconscious. You are allowed to walk away from beautiful chaos in the name of peace. And one final question, whispered through silence. Who drains you in ways you've been too kind to name? Maybe it's time to name them, and in naming, to finally choose yourself. Because your soul was not made to be a mirror. It was made to burn.